pleasure that I want to introduce Dario Nardi. Dario and I actually met at Linda's qualifying program in 1993, so we've known each other way too long. And Dario, absolute expert on all the lenses of type. And as you know, has co-written books with Linda on type descriptions. He's written his own books on neuroscience, personality, 8 Keys, a new book coming out. And his specialty really is taking a look at neuroscience and the brain, and he's done a lot of work linking it to personality type. So it's really innovative and leading edge in his field, and is also, how many of you are doing brain scans in this conference? And he also offered to take every spare moment of his time doing brain scans, which is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity in the UK. So, with pleasure, Dario, thank you.
Absolutely, thank you so much. Also, thank you for allowing me to stay with you and Derek for much of the trip as well, and lots of things to do. People keep asking me if there's going to be, may I?
Oh, yeah.
Hold it up, yeah. If there's going to be a new version, because honestly, it's in black and white and it's 5 years old. And if you can guess from any INT type or NT type, anything that's 5 years old is horribly out of date. And but at the same time, it's always a, what can I say? I'm not excited to go over old material. So what I've been working on is a variety of seminars on different topics, and the topic that we're going to talk about today is midlife. And because since I did the book, which was mainly focused on college students, do we have any college students here, university? I think we have at least 2. Come on, yeah. Okay, we have 3, 4. That's true, adult students, yeah. Okay, but you know, going all the way up to 80 years now. So lots and lots of people, 230, 240. And of course, questions come up about type development, about midlife, all those different issues. I do try and remain under 30 as long as I can, but in practice that's not always so easy. So of course, it's the topic re-energizing is an interest for me too. Fortunately, I live in Los Angeles, where the fountain of youth actually flows there, not somewhere mysterious in the jungle of Central America. So, what do I hope to cover today? And I really, originally proposed this as just a 60-minute little out-of-the-way session, and I'm really appreciative to have 90 minutes, because of course once I started creating it, to try and put everything into 30 slides. We'll see, I can do my best. So what are some things? Well, what's midlife in the brain? What does that even mean? We hear this topic. I hear from my college students now in the USA, they talk about quarter-life crisis. Isn't that sweet? Life is so difficult. In this first world country, they're having a quarter-life crisis. But what is this midlife crisis? So one thing I noticed is the way I look at people's brains. You can see what's going on in real time right in front of you, and you can also analyze the data afterwards to see how the brain is really organized from decades, or for the college students, just years, of habits. And for young folks, we're usually putting our energy into the things that we're trying to get good at, which are our preferences and the things we like to do. But as we get older, 40, 50, 60, 70, well, I can certainly say at least from the mid-30s through the mid-60s, that we actually tend to be putting our energy in parts of the brain where we don't have a whole lot of development. I'm not saying it's true for everyone all over at every time, but why is this? You know, what's going on, and what can we learn from this? So this idea is we tend to, where we put our mental energy tends to shift. So that's one sort of idea we're going to talk about today. The other is that people tend to develop the skills that support their practical needs. You know, things like, you have to go to work and pick a career and get married, like all these things that we do commonly in our culture, and also to meet our psychological needs. So we develop these skills. But what happens, anybody had this experience, you can say, who does career coaching? Careers coaching? Okay, quite a number of you. Somebody comes in and they've been at their company 10 or 15 years and they're really good at what they do, and the company wants to keep them or promote them or whatever it is, and they're like, I hate what I do. I know I'm good at it. I don't think it's a bad thing. I just would prefer not to do this anymore. And boy, that must be really frustrating, because you think once you've got on the fast lane and everything's set, why does the psyche suddenly decide now is time for change? And many times that change, the context it takes place in is we begin to explore skills that we didn't have skill in before. So when I was interviewing, did a session on a musician who was in his late 30s, is a very good musician, did live performances all the time, INFJ preferences. So he enjoyed the creative aspect of his music, working alone in his studio, but he also enjoyed performance on stage, as long as he had time to re-energize and to be creative. But he had really gotten quite good at his music, and when he came into the session, the regions of the brain were not active that were involved with music and hearing and speaking and so on. Areas involved with social skills and intuition, not active. Where it was active in the brain, if I had just seen that picture, I would have thought he was an ISTP. And when I asked him, what are your interests, he said, well, I'm really actually excited about building a business for myself. And you know what he's doing now? Just a few years later, he has become very involved in the family business of construction and flipping homes. I mean, he still does his music, of course, but the allure of business and physical activity, which he's also really been into. Okay, so if somebody said, you know, oh, there's this person, this young person, and he's in construction and flipping businesses and strategizing around that, and he's really into physical fitness. What are our stereotypes? Person is probably sensing, thinking preferences, okay? Yeah, so no, that's not the case. So we tend to develop skills that reflect our opposite type. Because, you know, when we're younger, we develop the skills we hope we try to develop the ones that meet our needs. So later on, not surprised. Now, all of you know about the 5 functions, right? Wait, no, don't you mean 4 functions or 8 functions? Aren't they always supposed to be multiples of 2? Is that really nice? Okay, a number of you may know Steve Myers, and I really tried to get Steve, no relationship to Isabel and Catherine Myers, who's up in Manchester, to come down to the conference, but he's trying to simplify his life by writing complex Jungian papers in journal psychology. And so he talks, you know, Jung described a 5th function: sensing, intuiting, thinking, feeling, and then this thing called the transcendent function. And after he did most of his work in type, he just sort of left that behind, but he continued to talk about the transcendent function a lot. So what is this transcendent function about? And so what is this? So we're going to talk about that. It's something that we construct from all of our life experiences, that we construct uniquely. And there's sort of a natural progression, because if we can focus on particular skills, make choices in our lives to move in different directions, then we can also, to some extent, try and consciously do things like creating space for the transcendent function to do its work. So we'll talk about what is it, what can we do. And then there's this re-energizing part, because the really nice thing is we may spend a lot of energy trying to maintain the persona. You know, and even some of us spend a lot of energy on type development. That's what happened to Steve. He spent a lot of energy trying to do, what is it, like cross-country motorbiking. That didn't turn out well. No one heard from him for 8 months after he got in a little accident. I'm developing sensing. Yeah, the sensing developed him. And so there's, well, what is it that we can do? Well, the beautiful thing is the nervous system doesn't stop at the brain. Of course, I look at the neocortex, and there's more. There's the limbic system, the deep brain, the old brain underneath. But beyond that, actually, the nervous system runs throughout the body, and it really, really does a lot of cool stuff. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that when we can get in touch with the whole nervous system, then we can do things that will rebalance our energy. I think it's something actually Susan was telling me about. I won't get into any detail, but someone, an acquaintance, you know, having some health difficulties, and we think like, oh, somebody who eats really well and like exercises all the time, like that person, especially even if they have good genetics, maybe you'd be shocked if they have bad health. But there's something missing in there, and it's about how we deal with stress. And I have to be honest, living in Los Angeles, I know this because it's always, you know, one of those big cities like London where you're going. You can get up really early and be excited about working out, and then you're like, oh, now I have to answer these calls and do this and do that. You know, it's actually a lot of stress. It's stressful to try and keep up all of those things. Oh no, I can't eat this food, I need to eat that food. I have to find this and that. It's stressful. So what are some ways to deal with stress? Because stress is what ages us and de-energizes us. And also, what is the stress the result of? Well, there are external conflicts and there are internal ones too. By the way, I promised originally in the proposal that there would be like a handout and activity and stuff like that, but I lied. I'm going to talk about activities you can do, but I really just want to share with you what's here. So some of it, by the way, it's not like I'm going to read all of this text. The thing is, I've been making these little colored booklets, and I was really hoping to have one for the conference, but the printer, there's all these printing issues. It will be ready next week. That doesn't help. But we do print directly in the UK, so we will be able to get those out. So these slides are actually from a booklet that's in progress, another one, the seventh one, down the road. But this idea, you know this, right? This little, I don't know if we can see from the blurriness, but this is the signature exercise. We ask people to write their name. And of course, their habit is to immediately write their name with their preferred hand. And then you ask them, well, could you write, and now sign it again, but with your other hand. And we realize things like type is about preference, and that skill often goes with preference. But maybe we don't feel like, we're not motivated to sign our name with our preferred hand. We're motivated to try and develop our other hand. Sometimes that happens. So there's this idea that people become really good at something. How many of you think that if I put you in a little brain machine that it asks you to sign your name, that we're going to see much brain activity? No, right? Because it's automatic. You don't even think about it. But if we were to get a 4 or 5-year-old to sign their name, okay, and maybe write a little paper, the very perfect handwriting and so on, that takes a lot of effort for them. Okay, so what happens is we gain a lot of skill, and the energy that was needed, the concentration that was needed to do that skill was no longer required. So I have these skills, you have these skills that you know how to do really well. Your brain doesn't need a lot of energy to do them, but you still have energy. So where are you going to put it? So that's a beautiful thing to know when we talk about re-energizing. It's like, oh, thank goodness we have midlife. We have a renewal of energy again. The question is, what are we going to do with it? Now there's this little thing about the fifth function. Maybe we're all missing a function. What is this? So this is a quotation from Steve Myers, and like I said, Steve has decided to simplify, so this is the abstract. From the mid-1930s to the end of his life, this is quoting from Steve, Jung complained that most readers misunderstood the main point of his book, Psychological Lives. That could be all of us, potentially. He viewed being a type as one-sided and problematic for a variety of reasons, and his symbol-based solution to the type problem. So many times people think, and I'll get to this later, about Peter Geyer also talking about, like, is type a model of personality? Actually, no, it's not a model. It's a therapeutic method that's symbol-based, and it's supposed to be a therapeutic method. The symbol-based solution to the type problem involved developing a transcendent function to become the new dominant function of consciousness. So what that's saying, that's suggesting, Vicky Joe, is that you probably think, and you, Robin, that your dominant functions are introverted intuiting, yes? Jung would say, actually, or rather Steve Myers would say that Jung would say, that ideally you want your transcendent function is your dominant function, and that introverted intuiting is your auxiliary. to appropriate some language. However, this function has not featured in the popular use of typology, and Isabel Briggs-Myers believed that the one-sidedness of Jung's 8 types could be balanced by introducing an auxiliary function. So introverted intuiting plus extroverted thinking, that would sort of create a dynamic and energy that would balance people out. This has led to the transcendent function being widely ignored, and to a developmental philosophy that encourages a degree of one-sidedness. Again, this is from Steve. So this is something for us to meditate on. This divergence of popular type theory and analytical psychology, yes, because type theory has gone one direction, and the Jungians are like, oof, type theory. Or, oh, okay, like we'll listen politely for a few minutes, and then they go back to what it is that they talk about. What is it that they talk about? Okay. The divergence of popular type theory and analytical psychology is the result of various factors, such as Jung describing typology as containing 4 functions, and a letter in 1950 where Jung apparently supported Meyer's version of type theory. I don't think it's apparently supported. I think it's, you know, you have a problem with it. This hinders the application of analytical psychology to normal psychology. Now, of course, he's writing in the Journal of Analytical Psychology, so I don't know what normal psychology is, but that's like saying a lead balloon. And particularly individual and cultural development. I mean, what would we do if we were normal? We wouldn't be here, right? If we refer to Jung's typology as containing 5 functions, not 4, this more accurately represents both the content of psychological types and the primary value Jung saw in typology. So that's an interesting thought. In your own work, if I were to just stop here and say we're over for today, and then we do an activity maybe, how would you incorporate the transcendent function into your work? To go up in front of a group and say, hey, I'm going to talk about 5 functions today. So that's one sort of takeaway. We'll get more into the transcendent function. And yes, what is it? So of course we could write a book about this, or people have already done that. I won't claim to know. In fact, almost by definition, whatever I say about the transcendent function will be from my own experience. At least I can quote some other folks, and then we'll get in their experiences too. So in the Collected Works, chapter 7, Jung says, the transcendent function is the process of coming to terms with the unconscious and, quote, a natural process, a manifestation of the energy that springs from the tension of opposites. So there we get this idea about opposites, which we're quite familiar with, but energy. Now, yeah, sometimes you talk about energy like where we recharge. It's true. But the energy, how does that play into the tension of opposites? So if we're talking about re-energizing, or re-energizing at midlife, where does that come in? I really believe that the transcendent function, this was a clue that was sort of letting me know maybe there's something here to this. Steve Myers describes the transcendent function as something we construct as uniquely ours. So it is, it may be obviously public, or it could be very, very private, built from everything that's happened in our lives. Joys, pains, successes, failures, what we've actually done, the potential for things that we could do, preferences, non-preferences, everything. And of course, we can't just say like, oh yes, I have a master plan, here I'm developing my transcendent function. No, it doesn't work that way. But of course, you can do things, and I have a specific list at the end of things that one can do that's based upon the brain research. So that's where we're going as our final destination. What is it that we can do to better manifest the transcendent function based on the brain research? Now, is this an easy thing to do? Here's another quote from Steve. Construction of the transcendent function is difficult for people to grasp, and they give up on it. That may be what happened with Isabel Briggs Myers. She thought she could never experience the transcendent function, yet she had one right under her nose, type theory. The theory that valued all types was itself an example of the transcendent function. She created something unique, and it's not usually typical for INFPs, is it, to sort of go out and do a lot of statistics for years and years to create this objective instrument that doesn't require a person to administer, to how can I say, be the focus of nationwide and eventually worldwide organization. I mean, young INFPs in particular love big organizations that are impersonal, right? Instruments and, yeah. No, maybe that had something to do with his inner STJ, okay, his opposite type. And so, for I'm thinking of students that I have and so on, and the same for Isabel Myers. Maybe this had something to do with the opposite type, and this is actually how she manifested. It was always there, just didn't quite realize it. Or maybe she did. Jungian historian Peter Geyer, I think many of you, at least the international folks, have met Peter before, argues that, quote, type is not a model. Rather, it is a therapeutic framework. The functions cannot be limited by formal definitions, otherwise they would cease to be useful as therapeutic tools. Because they'd be limited to specific peoples and eras and definitions. Rather, type is a mandala, this is my words then, not his, that we can keep re-engaging for discovery and growth. And that was actually the insight that came out of the first Miami APTI conference. Was it 2013, Jane?
Yeah.
Yeah. And Jane was actually the impetus for me to have that insight, because you had a really good idea for the conference. You suggested to folks, instead of trying to remember everything, or take dozens of notes and never look at them again, at the end of each workshop and the end of the conference, if you could just think of one insight that you'd like to keep with you going forward, and that was my insight, was that combining this was sort of what, of course Peter was there, and that was the insight that type is a therapeutic tool, self-therapeutic tool. Jung observed 4 ways that people metabolize experiences: sensing, thinking, intuition, and feeling. I don't need to go into those, because we all as a group pretty well know what those are. And he called those psychological functions, which we have later turned into types. And then types get sort of vilified, and putting people into boxes and so on happened, especially during the 80s and early 90s. It still happens in big organizations sometimes that haven't been introduced to the ethical and useful application of type. But we have these functions that we use to process our experiences. There's this 5th way, this transcendent function, that we create from the other functions. It's like a meta function. And it's something that grows out of, but also helps us work with the other ones. So what is the mandala that yourself has been creating over your lifetime? Do you have any sense of what that is? So we might think, oh, wasn't it obvious to Isabel Myers that she was engaged in type development? Her transcendent function, its product was type theory and the organization and the instrument and all of that. I think that was very obvious to her, wasn't it? Well, I'm going to ask you, what are the products and the experience of your transcendent function? Can you name those? Do you have a sense of those? Maybe. It's tough. And it might not be something obvious like in the career domain. It could be family. It could be something that's in hobbies. It could be in a variety of things. Okay, it really depends not only upon our type, but also just our unique circumstances and gifts and all of that. So not so easy always to figure out what that is. Now I promised myself I'd do a little bit of extroverted thinking to stay on time. Not bad, not bad. Okay, I'm at slide 9, and I'm 1/3 of the way out of 30, so that's in terms of minutes. So that's not so bad. I'll tell you a little bit about my lab, so you'll have some orientation of where the brain is going to come in and illuminate this lovely little thing here. By the way, mandalas don't always look like this, of course. You can create your own mandala anytime of anything you want to. I'll just tell you a little bit about my lab. A number of you have heard my work before. You've seen pictures and so on. I keep updating what I do all the time. New equipment, lots more subjects, those kind of new questions, all these things. We can use electroencephalogram, brain imaging technology, in order to document what goes on in a person's brain as they do different tasks, as they interact, as they do math, as they play games, as they draw, as they use their imagination. Is Norbert here? No. Norbert is not here, from Czech Republic. Okay. That's in Norbert's office there. So it's not Norbert, but that's in his office in Czech Republic. Great stuff there at Coaching Systems. Calculating, communicating, all of these things. This was actually really funny. This was a few years ago. And Andrea Isaacs, who's a therapeutic coach in the USA, who primarily works with Enneagram, but she has presented before years ago at type conferences, likes type. She managed to convince this gentleman, who she randomly met the day before the conference, who has ESFP preferences, who came in on a motorcycle to do brain imaging, which he had no knowledge of, and he said yes, as long as he could do it outdoors. Because he was in Los Angeles for the conference, it was beautiful outside, so I just wanted to be outside for this. So I'm like, okay, we'll set up everything outside and see how it goes. Glad we did that. So I have participants wear this cap. Sometimes they have a nice little band as well, and try an hour's worth of tasks. And the idea is just to stimulate the brain with many different activities, see what interests them, see how their brain works. And then this is an inside view of the brain. Dun, dun, dun. They say, what is it? The 21st century is the century of the brain. I don't know, the century of a lot of things. But as an inside view, it's like if we cut the brain in half, networks link its layers and regions. So this is the back of the brain here, okay, and this is up in front. So this up in front here would be behind your forehead, okay? Try and make sure you don't have any accidents hitting your forehead. That's an important part. Those executive regions there manage the whole rest of the brain. Really, really important. And I suppose if you're young, you can recover if you have some kind of accident or whatever. And the interesting thing about the executive regions is, and I say there's two things. One is for teenagers, okay? Because as they're going through physical changes and also school and all of this stuff, the brain decides in the executive regions it's going to do a complete remodeling from like 13 to 25. It's a perfect time to do remodeling, isn't it? While everything else is going on. Then there's the neocortex. So that's this outer layer of the brain right here. Outer layer. And it includes all of our conscious learned skills, the results of education, upbringing, all of that. We can introspect on what's going on in the neocortex, and not all of it is crystal clear in terms of consciousness as we expected, but it's accessible. And it's very educatable. Okay? And it's something that is very special in mammals and uniquely developed in human beings. We also have the limbic system. Okay? I like to call the limbic system the cat-dog brain. That's not what it's called, of course, in any neuroscience textbooks. Sometimes folks will call it monkey brain or something like that. The point is we share it with other mammals. The behaviors that we share with your cat, your dog, your monkey, things like pair bonding, anger, phobias, sexual attractions and impulses, all the things you care about really deeply, you have a passion for those. Limbic system. It's also home to memory. Isn't that great? You're going to put memory. No wonder human beings have sketchy memory. We're putting it in the spot where all of the stuff where we have like biases and phobias and all of these things are also happening. Brilliant, isn't it? Okay, it's like taking your memory files and deciding, no, it's like this. You have an office, you have filing cabinets, and you're going to store them outdoors on the sidewalk. Like, why would you do this? Okay, but this is how the brain happened. Okay, then we have the cerebellum here, the medulla, is part of this basic functioning, like breathing and walking. Also avoid damage to this area. Very important. Now, one thing that happens that we're going to see is that what processes out of the limbic system, which is like the midbrain, and this is the hindbrain, you have like three brains there, is that what comes out of the limbic system can be really in conflict with the neocortex. So it's something we're going to talk about. Where do those inner conflicts come from? And there are great examples, not my research so much because I don't work with the limbic system, but other people who've done research there. And an example would be this. Actually, I'm getting ahead of myself because I have several slides on it, so I'll tell you the example. But the point is that these different parts of the brain can be in conflict with each other. They're also wired in networks. So various regions get in sync to link stimuli, processing, output. So you hear something, you see something that goes into your brain, it gets processed, you have some kind of output, you say something back, you change your attention, you feel something. And then the question is, are these different things well wired? Well, they're based upon years of habits. Right now, your brain, every few seconds, is repeating, firing down those pathways that you've been burning for the last 40, 50, 60 years. Even by doing nothing, okay, you're actually reinforcing who you already are. And then, of course, by repeating stuff, like you go to, say you do the same office, same kind of thing every day, or maybe you're a musician or something, for 20 years, you're repeating brain constantly every few seconds. It gets burned in there, and then those become habits, and those become established networks. And then we wonder why it's hard to change. Let's be fair with ourselves. It's not easy. Maybe the transcendent function didn't catch on because it has no practical application. It's too hard for people. As we talk about change in type, that's a topic, change in organizations and for people, but it can be done actually. Now, something else that's useful to know is also the speed of the brain. We don't have one speed for your brain. But since we're talking about midlife, I want to mention it because we want to know what's the average synchronizing speed between brain regions, maybe your favorite brain region. So if I come and ask you, we're having ice cream later, would you like chocolate, vanilla, or strawberry ice cream?
All of them.
Okay, that took three seconds to decide, but it seemed like you actually made the decision around 2 seconds, and then there was just that verbalization of quite how you were going to say it. That happened in second 3. Teenagers have a speed, I mean, I've seen it from 15 to 20 or maybe 25, I say 15 to 25, between 0.5 seconds and maybe 1.5 seconds. Chocolate, vanilla, or strawberry, strawberry. Okay, I don't even finish asking the question and they've got it. Okay, that doesn't mean there's any wisdom behind that speed, but it does. Isn't that terrible? They have really quick speed and they have nothing to, you know. Conversely, adults are around 2 seconds, and then older folks maybe around 2.5 seconds. I say adult is like 25 to 55, 65 in there. It's hard for me to quite draw because it's actually, you know, continuous. And then older. You're not doomed to this, by the way. So there's a psychiatrist I occasionally work with at UCLA. I've seen some of his patients. We do brain imaging with them. We did it with him, and he's in his early 60s, and he still has the brain speed of a college student. So, you know, brain remains active, and so you're not consigned to this. This is merely statistical. But I do want you to consider there was a gentleman who came in, one of his patients, who was 80 years old, and his best speed was a little over 4 seconds. So that's like me saying, Catherine, let's see, where would you like to go on vacation? Or, you know, how's the weather like outside right now? And we're going to count 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,000, and then you're able to give an output. And imagine that's your fastest speed. And then imagine somebody comes along who has a speed of 1 second instead, so they're 4 times faster. This is what we discovered with Susan Nash. What is it, Susan? You have tons of thoughts in the time period that most people have just gotten one out the door.
It's not an advantage.
Yes, right. It's not an advantage, is it? No. I think this can happen for ENFPs too, because it's not necessarily that ENFPs, as opposed to ENFJs, have really, really fast speed. They don't. But all the regions are active simultaneously, so every 2 seconds or so, instead of every 1 second, say, they have 15 thoughts. It still creates the same bottleneck effect. Just one of them is linear, lots going really quickly. The other one is just like, oh my goodness, all over the place. So there's some, we're hoping that the slower speed is due to just needing to process more experiences to come up with better results. But it could also be due to things like health. So a nice study was done in the US and a parallel one in the UK that compared footballers to who were, you know, in their mid-20s to, in the UK, sciences graduate students, equivalent of graduate students in their mid-20s. And they gave them a variety of like speed and reaction and thought tests and like problem solving with 3D shapes and those kinds of things, word problems. The usual IQ kinds of tests. And which group do you think did better? The ones who play football professionally, or the ones who are professional academics, or academics to be? The footballers did better. And they found this was true when they tried them at age 15 as well, that in the US, that the high school students who played American football actually did better than their peers in the science classes on intelligence tests. Because the thought is that the blood was today, and this actually could really be the case, the blood is better circulating in the athletes, and that circulation has that much of an effect on thinking. So that right away reminds us, if you want to get re-energized, something, what is it that you want to do? Move! Okay, I know as I say that as we're all sitting, but moving is very important. Okay, so here's a little bit, this is a bird's eye view of the neocortex, our diverse toolbox. And you can find this, I regularly update this in different places. I'm constantly updating it because new research comes in, I have more people. There's new sensors, so the new device I got has 19 sensors and actually can be upgraded to 21. I just need to get new caps to actually support the 21. But these regions here in the middle, there are a variety of things. So much. Okay, it covers concrete things. You know, like moving your right and left hands, being able to hear voice tone, being able to say words. It also covers very abstract things like ethics. Did you know, by the way, there's a region of your brain right here in the right hemisphere, it's called the temporoparietal bridge, that if we were to stimulate that with electricity, that you would, for time, stop considering ethics as part of decision making. Some great research done by the US military on this. It's not a joke, it's true. No, and their reasoning is this, it's temporary, but their reasoning is that in battle, what is the #1 reason why soldiers get shot is because they wait, because they have a thought that says, maybe I shouldn't shoot this child even though they have a gun or something like that, or this woman because she has a gun. And that split second of waiting can be deadly. So that's why they've looked at that. But that does, that sort of doesn't mean the only thing we use to decide ethics. The brain is not completely modular. It's not like, oh, we're going to take this out and all of a sudden, you're completely disabled there. There is sort of that effect sometimes with certain things like speech, especially. Okay, and of course, avoid any brain damage if you can. But really, I say that all of these different parts of the brain aid us in what we do. So when you do reading, for example, you're attending a conference and you're listening, you're doing more than listening, you're processing, you're seeing, you're thinking about other things, you're connecting the ideas. Okay, all different parts of the brain are connected. So it's not a surprise you're going to see regions of the brain that helps us with abstract language, concepts, categories, metaphors. And that we'll have another part of the brain that allows us to work with symbols and patterns and meaning. Abstract meaning. Our timeline, our personal timeline, like how we store and retrieve stuff from our own narrative of our lives. So lots and lots of stuff that it helps us with. And a lot of times there's redundancy, so there's this part is here which helps us analyze faces, like facial expression. Like here I'm seeing like your mouth is turned a particular way, and I could think like, oh, what does that mean? And then there's another part over here which allows us to recognize faces. I'm terrible at it. I know I'm not good at recognizing. So there's, it's, what do we do? But the recognizing faces is a funny thing, by the way. It doesn't mean like somebody's walking down the street and you recognize the face. It can mean that. But what it often means is that you go into a room and there's somebody you know well, like your spouse, and you're like, well, I recognize that face on you. That kind of recognize the face, the facing context. Now we shouldn't be surprised that there's some relationship, as I mentioned at the beginning, between skill development and type preference. It's not a one-to-one. I know some people, especially early on, certainly I was hoping early on, wouldn't it be great we could just, why use a type instrument that's relying upon opinion of the person has it themselves, and we could just give them a brain scan and find out what type they are. But it doesn't work that way. Psyche is a little bit bigger than what's inside here. And what's inside here reflects a lot of things, our upbringing, our career, all of that. The more I look at adults, the more it's very clear. Even if I look at, say, 5 different musicians, the way that they do music, the kind of music they play is reflected in the organization of the brain. So it could be very, very specific. But the good news is still, given the same diverse set of tasks over an hour, they've got 20 different things, people tend to tap some brain regions more than others, of course. And there's a consistency to that, even from one session to the next, like test, retest. And the result aligns with their personality profile, their career, and their background, with personality being a big piece. So we shouldn't be surprised here that Maria, on the left here, shows this particular pattern. She happens to have INFP preferences. Notice this nice little halo around the outside of the skull there. Okay? And then Ross over here with ESTP preferences, almost the exact opposite set of skills. Now, of course, there's some overlaps and so on. Especially, our culture very much prizes the use of language. We have to write and speak and use language in precise ways all the time. Of course, people can speak without any education. I mean, they have for millennia. But it's amazing what education and a work environment that emphasizes language, what it does to how we speak. Have I even used the word like? Like, California style, keeping that in mind. Okay, so the good news is that type does make some difference. We can detect something that's meaningful. We also know, digging deeper, now right here, this is just the amount of activity in each region. It's sort of like, white is the most active, black is the least active. But what I've been interested in since the book is neural circuits. So how different regions are connecting, cooperating with each other. And again, we have 2 folks, or 2 different folks, by the way. One with ESFP preferences, and the other one with INTP preferences. ESFP and INTP. One of the things I noticed right away is the difference. We're looking at these dark lines showing the strongest link, that this gentleman here has tons of links in the back of the brain, back in here. Things involved with vision and visual spatial processing, sensory integration. Okay, lots and lots of dense stuff there. He also has a sort of starburst pattern, which you might be able to see. It's in light gray. Okay, so that is a stylized way to indicate all of the brain regions firing simultaneously together, which is typical of folks with a strong intuiting preference or in a creative profession or maybe left-handed, regardless. So if you have ISFJ or ISFP, they're in a creative profession or they're left-handed or something, they may show this too. Also, somebody with intuiting preferences may be very technical in the way they were raised in their work, and they won't show this. But he does, okay? He has this. And then he has this neat little connections over here. One of them was this line here. And he knew a little bit about my work with these circuits, and he asked you, what does that mean? Because he looked at the other INTP examples I have. I have like 20 INTPs now. And he's like, I don't see this in any of the other INTPs. And I said, well, this is actually that temporoparietal bridge that I mentioned earlier about ethics. Okay, that's where that's located. You can't pinpoint that exactly, but that's what I've been seeing. And types who tend to have it, for example, like NF types. Now he said, oh, that's really interesting. He said, because my job is to go around to different organizations and teach ethics. Oh, okay. Oh, that's cool to know. And he also has right up there at the very top, there's a little line underneath the nose, and that's indicating some nice executive coordination there. Because if our brain were a company, it has two CEOs. A very goal-focused CEO, okay, and then like really open-ended, it's a CEO who's sort of exploring, and they need to cooperate with each other, and usually as adults they do. And then we have over here at ESFP, and you can see most of her connections are at the front of the brain. And that's typical of people who are with more extroverted behaviors. I don't mean extroverted preference, although that can align, but you know, there are extroverts who are like a little bit more quieter, and then there are extroverts who are like really extroverted. And there are introverts who are pretty comfortable extroverting, and then there are introverts who are really quiet and shy, and as you say, extra British. And that's, so there, she's not one of those. She's an extroverted ESFP. And the connections are there more at the front of the brain, and she doesn't have that whole brain pattern that's there. I have seen that this whole brain sort of pattern once in ESFP who's left-handed. And definitely creative type. She says, oh, I'm interested in so many things. I just love chatting to people about going to traveling, and she part of type. She loves type because it's so interesting to learn about people. And then this line here coming this way. So of course I debriefed the results with her, and she's like, well, what does this one mean? Because we noticed there was a lot of auditory connections. They're not a surprise for ESFPs. They're very auditory. They hear a lot of things that you say, even if you didn't mean to say it that way. They heard it. And so she has this line here, and I'm like, what is this about? Well, that's connecting like the front and the middle of the temporal areas in the right hemisphere, and that's actually where this region of the brain is involved with sympathy. And it's also involved with knowing like what your mood is, or whether you're hungry or tired or something. So it tells you what your mood is, your internal body sensations. And let's see if no, I don't love the British accent. It's I feel your pain is Bill Clinton. Okay, so Bill Clinton, he comes from Hope. He likes to say he's from Hope, Arkansas, but he's really from Hot Springs, where my dad and my stepmom are retired to. And he would always say, he said, I feel your pain. Okay, he really meant it. It's like, I have a sensation, I feel your pain. I mean, it might just be, in congestion, but whatever. But this is the part of the brain that does allow us to actually feel, to model what somebody else is. And just as we feel our own mood, we can feel somebody else's mood. Or as I like to say, little kids, like 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, if they see other kids vomit, what do you think is going to happen? Okay, they have a lot of sympathy for the other kids, just not under control. So the brain wiring makes a big difference, and you can look at general patterns like front and back of the brain, or left and right, or something like that. And you can also pick apart. We don't know what all the different connections mean, but we have some good ideas about what a number of them mean. And this is important. It leads into what I'm going to talk about with some stuff later. As I sort of mentioned, two people who identify, regardless of which view, okay, we're going to do this view or this view, people who identify with the same preferences, say two INFPs, have brains that are, what's the chance that they're going to be exact match? Okay, so what's the chance? Going backwards there, no, don't want to go that way. Okay, there we go. Who's an INFP towards the front of the... Okay, great. Okay, we have INFP over here. Thank you. And so what's the chance that your brain will look like Maria's brain? Sort of hard to say, isn't it? I mean, we think type.
I suppose right or left-handed influence.
Well, that could influence it, certainly. And you grew up in France, or yes, Belgium. Okay, so that might be different. Maybe Maria grew up in Mexico, or in this case, I think Honduras. So there's some difference there. Yeah, some upbringing. Of course, she's a woman and you're a man. I don't find in the neocortex there's much gender differences, but we're not surprised by that because it's mainly formed by education. So the differences we do see tend to be ones that are because, say, boys tend to play sports more often. So they have more parts of the brain that work for that. So gender, probably not so much of an influence, but we'd probably say they're both going to be very auditory. We'll find out. You did the EEG, so we're going to find out, yeah? What the statistics say, the chance you have an exact match is going to be that little blue sliver there. Okay, it's like 95% or better matches. It's actually pretty unlikely. What we're probably going to get is like an 85% match, which is still really amazing. Okay, and that's just very similar. Okay, half the time people come out like 80 to 90, 95% similar of the same type. But we have this other slice here, this really big slice, it's like 35, 40% at the time. The person is just like pretty similar. It's like 50% similar, and 50% different. Okay, that means the ENTP can come along, and that ENTP will look more like, say, let's say a friend that they have. Okay, so of a completely different type, say like ENFP or ESFP or something like that. It's possible, I met that once. ENTP, raised by an ESFP mother, and she's a counselor, just like her mother is. And her brain wiring, when I first saw it, except for one region that's very typical with ENTPs, all the rest of it looked exactly like an ESFP. So she did not look like the usual ENTP. She was getting her needs met, but in a different way. And actually, it turns out it's not so much getting her needs met. Because the ENTP trying to live through ESFP skills is not always the best thing. But she's young, her brain will keep growing. And then being really different, that's unlikely. Okay, it happens though. There's always that one INFP out of 20 who's not like the others. And I don't think it's because they're mistyped or so. Yeah, there is a tension of humor there. It's not because they're mistyped. I really don't think so. I go to tremendous lengths to try and get a best fit type. Otherwise, what would be the point of the research? Midlife. This is the example I talked about at the beginning. We'll call him Barry. That's not his name, but with age, we explore non-preferences. So this is what I saw during the lab. I saw somebody who had all this activity on the interior of the brain, and these auditory regions over here were completely black, even when he was playing music for me. And so if I just saw this image right here, I would think somebody who does not have good auditory skills, social skills that would be here and here, weak, no interest there. Even stuff over here on this side of the brain, not really this symbolic, intuitive kind of pattern recognition, not strong. But wow, the stuff in the brain on physical activity, tactile kinesthetics, tactics, strategy, logical thinking, categories and concepts, really good at all of those. Brain activity, the wiring in the center, a little bit more towards the back, so probably more introverted. I'm thinking like ISTP. Okay, no. Okay, then I look at his wiring. This is short-term, this is the long-term picture underneath. There's almost no connections in the middle except for this whole brain pattern. We see all these auditory connections on the sides here, okay, strong connections, things relating to pattern recognition and intuition. Stuff up here that is related to rapport building and imagination. These two images are completely different. Well, he does the auditory stuff, so I imagine you're Vicky Joe, I think you can speak for at least one INFJ, right? Okay, when you're interacting with people, the socializing, sort of feeling out their emotions, or you use intuitive approach, creativity. Is that a really tough task for you that you got to think about? You got to put one foot in front of the other.
Lord, no.
No. Okay. No. Okay, so it's just like it's automatic. So why would you be putting brain activity there? So no wonder all of Barry's brain activity was going into regions that actually didn't have any wiring with them. So he's thinking, yeah, I'm going to go into business. It's like saying you're going to go into business and you don't know what money is. Okay, so he's got a long way. I mean, this is a few years ago. So it seems like he's come a ways since then. But that's the kind of divergence that happens. And so this is what midlife looks like in the brain. And this can happen. I mean, I've seen this even with mid-20s. It's just not as often, and it's with fewer regions or sort of out of sync with each other in terms of energy versus skill. In fact, we have some words for that. Oh, I'll mention this first, and I'll go back to the other one. The intersections of competence and motivation. Those are some words that we have. Okay? So we can have high competence or low competence. It is a sort of a general, of course it's along a spectrum, but let's just say for the sake of making a nice little matrix, because organizations love matrices. And then we have a high interest and low interest. And we can sort of see the high brain activity is indicating interest, engagement. Okay, low brain activity in a part of the brain that's like non-interest. The neural wiring, dense or sparse. Dense or wiring, okay, is going to be where there's more competence. There's years of burning those neural connections. They're getting parts to cooperate. So high brain activity plus dense neural wiring is great. The person's capable, they eagerly enjoy what they're doing, and they're good at it. It's a reliable indicator. Keep going with it. But I think what happens a lot of time at midlife is that we end up with this. Okay? Low brain activity in a region, even though there's a lot of development there. Skilled, but bored. And in fact, even engaging in it is like, it's like to climb over a wall. Once you get into it, maybe it's okay. But it takes effort. Or we can end up with, we end up with this here, high interest but lack of skill. It's a challenge area. We want to do well, but we lack skill. Or maybe we have skill in that one area, but it's not integrated with the rest of us. So it's something we do as like a little hobby time by ourselves, or maybe a specific environment, but it doesn't translate into the rest of who we are in our lives. There's also no-go area. Okay, there's some things maybe we shouldn't just suddenly jump in to start developing, or try to when we have low motivation, low interest, and also low skill there. This is beautiful. Like the brain really, I think, resonates what we see, what we know about interest and motivation on the one hand, and then competence, or what we call skill, on the other. Now, there's one more little twist to sort of highlight this. As we age, those flow states, a number of you have heard me talk about flow states. It's the solid blue here, when the person is very relaxed, but the brain is also at maximum amplitude. It's at maximum interest, but it's also very relaxed. And I see this a lot of times when people are engaged in activities which require expertise and also improvisation and creativity. So this blue, what we call delta, predominates when we're relaxed, receptive, but also in the flow. Now, what happens is I had a gentleman come in, and he's 40, and he has ISFP preferences, and he does photo retouching of magazine covers. In fact, if you've ever seen People magazine, Us, like actually Esquire, all of these different magazines that are out there, GQ, that kind of thing, he's probably retouched them. The folks you think we know what they look like, they don't really quite look like what they do on the covers. In fact, I learned David Beckham, in terms of the lines on his face, has to be retouched. About 2/3 of the lines have to be soft. They have to be softened by about 2/3 in order to get the picture that you see on the magazine cover. Now, he's been doing this for a long time, 15 years, and he makes very good money from it. And so he brought in his computer, and he's actually doing some photo retouching for me with the brain cap on. Okay, and his brain looks like this. This is the same as when someone is asleep or watching television. And he is so desperate to get out of his profession, which makes him so much money. And you would think, like, oh, can't he just train people to do this and then they'll do it? And yes, he has people who are assistants. He's like, but the high-end stuff really requires concentration and focus. And that does sometimes, if it's a really difficult picture, people come in, they say, can't you just move the celebrity's arm like a little bit more this way? Or like, his favorite is, can't you just rotate them? He's like, you give me a photograph. I can't rotate them in the photograph. He said, but you can get some simple to stimulate his brain. He says, but then I have to deal with the clients, and dealing with the clients. The sort of the elite of Hollywood and the magazine industry, he's like, his ISFP preferences, so these people are the opposite of somebody who's like calm and sensitive and empathic. Compassionate, magazine industry doesn't have compassion. So this is what he had, and this was one of those convincers that says maybe he needs to figure out an exit strategy for what he does. Before this, well, his midlife is just coming up on him, so it was cool to see that. Okay. This was great. So we are, actually, yes, I managed to stay on time by one slide. No questions, though, about one slide. All right, no questions yet. I do have a slide for questions. To rebalance, so we talked about this, okay, so there's this idea that type makes an impact on our brain, but also our career and upbringing and all of that. We develop skills that, of course, meet our needs, our type needs, our practical needs, and as we get older, we get to do those skills so well that actually we don't need to put energy in them anymore. So now we have this extra energy. It may not be tons of energy like when we were 5, and a few of you have small grandchildren, don't you? Or children who seem to have so much energy, like the energy of 5 people, or an atomic bomb. And it's like, where does all of this come from? Okay, so we may not have that energy, but we still have excess energy. And so where is it going to go? And isn't that great when like little kids are so carefree and they're running and laughing and they're oblivious to the world? All the things that go on when you read the news. Don't you wish you had never discovered the news? How can we return to that state? Well, maybe we really can't, but wouldn't it be nice to at least rebalance